Good morning, and welcome to the Africa Weekly Talk. Today's subject on the docket is the historic UN General Assembly Resolution A80 L48, the gravest crime against humanity resolution that was passed by the UN General Assembly on March 25th, 2026, spearheaded and revived by Ghana with the African Union and the Caribbean countries all behind this resolution. And finally, this resolution was able to pass with 123 votes in favor, 3 no votes, and 52 abstention. But fellows, it is very unfortunate that you have to have a UN resolution to acknowledge that slavery is the gravest crime against humanity. It shouldn't be, but that's where we are today. And you've been hearing a lot of talk right after this resolution was passed, because this resolution called for reparations and the return of artifacts and so on and so forth. Even though this resolution is non-binding, so it's pretty much just an acknowledgement by the world body that slavery was the gravest crime against humanity. But with the United States voting no on this resolution, it also questioned the narrow of this resolution holding Western countries responsible. So based on that narrow resolution bill that was introduced, the United States couldn't support this bill. And there are a lot of questions also about why the European countries abstained from this bill. But fellows, look, I can understand the United States even having the balls to vote no on this resolution. The European countries, in my opinion, should have also had the balls to vote no against this resolution. But guess what, fellas? They ain't going to vote no on this resolution because they couldn't. Because, the United States was pretty much upfront and truthful about their opposition to the resolution, which I strongly believe that they will never support a resolution in this form on any platform, whether in the United Nations General Assembly or not. Because they're looking at the legal implications of this resolution. If the United States government is ready and willing to pay reparations to the African Americans who were enslaved in America, then they can support a resolution like this. Just as well as the Europeans. That's why I said the Europeans should have had the balls to say that, look, we are not supporting this revolution and we are voting no. But by trying to abstain, they're not fooling nobody. They're not fooling nobody because they're in the same position just like the United States. And they wouldn't want any legal implications. So they will never also support a resolution like this. Let's be real here, fellas. That is why they try to hide behind abstaining from this resolution. But the fact of the matter is that the European countries can never support a resolution as far as they know that if there are any legal implications, they can be tied to it. So they should be able to stand up and say, look, we are not voting just because of this and that and that, And if the United States and these European countries have been already talking about this issue about what about the responsibilities of the tribal heads of these African tribes that also played some role in some of these slave, transatlantic slavery and so on and so forth. But fellas, my opposition to this resolution is not just narrow, it's not just about being narrow to transatlantic slavery, but also it created this notion that transatlantic slavery, which started in the 15th century, is the only gravest crime of slavery against humanity that has been committed to black people on this planet. I mean, this resolution was not about slavery in general, because if you go back to slavery in general, then you're talking about millions or thousands of years that every continent did engage in. So you cannot have a resolution like that. But if you're going to talk about modern day slavery, then fellows, you cannot have a UN General Assembly resolution only centered on transatlantic slavery without going back to the 7th century Muslim Arab slavery that also preceded the transatlantic slavery and pretty much was the precursor, pretty much laid the groundwork for the transatlantic slavery that was spearheaded then by Portuguese and the Spaniards. Let me repeat this. The 7th century Arab Muslim slave trade was pretty much the precursor of what will later become the transatlantic slavery. And there are historical facts to this. Because these Portuguese and the Spaniards will follow the same trend, the direction that these Arab Muslim slave trade owners had taken hundreds and hundreds of years before the transatlantic slavery. So the Portuguese and the Spaniards, they not just moved from Europe and then came to Africa and said, oh, let's go and find some slaves in Africa. No. They followed the playbook that had been established by the Muslim Arab slave trade going back the 7th century. So if you want to have a UN resolution talking about the gravest crime against humanity, it has to go back to the 7th century Arab Islam slave trade. That also was one of the harshest slave trade encounter that Africans will ever have to go through. That is something we cannot forget. These are historical facts because you go back to the 7th century Muslim Arab slave trade that pretty much occurred from the coast of some part of West Africa, Mauritania, Mauritius, Senegal, all the way through the Sahel to North Africa, Eastern Africa, which back then was called Northeastern Africa, all the way through what we call today Zanzibar, Tanzania, Kenya, Somalia, Ethiopia, and across the Red Sea into what we call the Middle East today, and all the way to some part of even Europe, around what we call the Mediterranean, Greeks, Portugal, Spain, and so on and so forth. And no wonder if you look at Spain and Portugal, where they are located in Europe, why would anybody be surprised that the transatlantic slavery was spearheaded by these very two countries, Portugal and Spain? So fellas, I get it. I mean, I can go back and talk about the Moors, and the Moors did not enslave anybody. Yes, they might have brought some slaves to Africa when they came from Spain, but they didn't enslave. They did not take slaves like what slaves that we are talking about. So if you want to talk about a UN resolution to condemn slavery as the gravest crime against humanity, we can never and never not mention the 7th century Arab Islam slave trade that pretty much went on for about 1,300 years, disseminated pretty much all of Northeastern Africa, the black natives of Northeastern Africa, Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, and then the northeastern part towards Ethiopia, to the middle of Africa, Central Africa, Senegal, the Sahel. With the introduction of Islam, also came with this slave trade. So we cannot just say, oh, let's go ahead and, pass a resolution targeting the transatlantic slavery. And in the United States, objection to this resolution also did mention something. They didn't go further to talk about the 7th century Islam, Muslim Arab slave trade. But they talk about the responsibility that is being placed on the Western countries. I'm surprised they didn't even go back to say that, hold on, the 7th century Arabs and Muslims also contributed against Africans that caused some of the gravest crime that ever committed to mankind. So if we want to do something that for the world to be able to understand the history of slave trade, then we have to go back and introduce another resolution where we can also lump these two resolutions together. Add the Muslim Arab slave trade to the transatlantic slave trade into one resolution for all these countries to vote on. Because at the end of the day, you can never separate the transatlantic slavery from the 7th century Muslim Arab slave trade that also took place in Africa. Because that was the beginning of Africans being pretty much taken from their land, their continent, and transported across oceans to other parts of the world beyond their homelands. That was the beginning. And we cannot separate these two. Yes, some people will argue, oh, 7th century goes way back, it is further. No, you still have historical situations going on right now if you go to Zanzibar in Tanzania and you go along the eastern part of Africa where you still have symbols and the impact of that slave trade. So it's not that old. I mean, we're not talking about slavery going back thousands and thousands and thousands of 10,000, 15,000 years, when pretty much every continent had slaves. The Chinese, the Asians had their own slaves, the Europeans, Africans, everybody had it. That's what we are talking about. Because the reason why this resolution was introduced, because it looks and sounds and very pretty much modern, which is not that old, which is true. But the 7th century Muslim Arab slave trade is not that old either. As much, like I said, it was the precursor. Because the Portuguese themselves said that the maps that they used to get into the interior of Africa came from the part that had already been taken by the Muslim Arab slave traders back then. And remember, the Arab slave trade continued for 1,300 years. 1,300 years, fellows. That's what we are talking about. I mean, it is unfortunate. So I would rather prefer a UN resolution putting these two slave trade that pretty much disseminated Africa together for the world to know that the gravest crime against humanity happened in two phases. One, the Muslim Arab slave trade starting in the 7th century, and the transatlantic slave trade that also started in the 15th century. These two are the two most heinous crimes that human beings can commit against fellow other human beings. And it should be lumped together. This shouldn't be about politics. Okay, this shouldn't be about politics where you're going to say that, oh, because these Arab countries in the Persia and what we call Turkey, the Middle East or Southeast Asia, or whatever you call today, and the Western countries, and with colonization that taking place during the days of slavery and after slavery, so we're going to play the politics of it by trying to separate that from what had happened, which had also been the precursor to the transatlantic slavery that Africans have to go through. And it still reverberates today in eastern part of Africa. Like I said, you go to Zanzibar, it's still there. You still see the slave castles. You still see everything down there in Zanzibar. I mean, this thing went on for quite some time, my fellows. This is nothing, something that we can say, oh, it is way too far. No, back the line. No. I'm sorry. So if the AU, the African Union, I'm kind of astonished that how they didn't even go back to that history and lump this thing together. Because I can get it. Some people say, oh, you just wanted to get a resolution to pass. I'm sorry. Yes, you wanted to get a resolution to pass, but evil is evil. And you have to call evil by any means, regardless of who it affects. Yes, I get most North Africa and part of Africa, Islam, and so on and so forth, mixed with Arabs and so on. I get all of that. But that doesn't mean that what was done to the Africans going back 1,000 years should not also be condemned just because of the fact that today some of these Africans are now members of the Islamic faith or Arabs and mixed with Arabs and so on and so forth. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Because if that resolution had been introduced together, then we will find out which countries will vote to support it or to vote against it. Because at the end of the day, either way, if this thing had been binding, but it's not binding, then all these countries in the middle part of Africa, Middle East, what you call Middle East today, who also participated in it, will just have to be held accountable just like that of the European countries and America. I'm sorry, fellows, because like I said, the impact, and we're talking about male, men, and women, boys and girls. I mean, you talk about 15 million people, according to some estimates, all the way to 18 million. According to some estimates, that the Islam-Arab slave trade took from Africa, according to some estimates. And if you look at the estimate that is being said about the transatlantic slave, you talk about also 12, 15 million people. In my mind, I think it might be more people, but I mean, that's the numbers I think they use based on those who were able to arrive to their new destination or their new countries, arrive alive. So just imagine those that died on their way, as well as those that died during and being tried and being captured on the African continent. But now let's move on to the issue of reparations. Even though it's a non-binding resolution, there was also a call for reparations and the return of artifacts to the African continent and so on and so forth, which was good. I mean, this resolution being an historic resolution, acknowledging that, this was done, it's all good. But they have to go back to the drawing board and add the Muslim Arab slave trade too. It has to be added. I'm sorry, fellas. It has to. Because you cannot take these two apart because they are together. They are together. Somebody got to learn from somebody. Somebody got to learn from somebody. It didn't happen in a vacuum. Like I told you guys, I mean, look at where Portugal is. Look at where Spain is. It was not by accident that it was the Portuguese. The Portuguese and the Spaniards were the first before the Western Europeans, the Europeans and the French and all of them came in later. It was not by accident, fellas. They took the same playbook. They had a playbook and the directions. I mean, these are recorded facts. Anyway, it's not something that I'm making it up. These are facts. These are recorded facts from even the Portuguese themselves, fellows. But anyway, now talking about the reparations, that is where all this thing is centered on. Whenever you talk about the issue of slavery, if it's about just resolution, acknowledging, and apologies, then a lot of these countries will do that. They will acknowledge and apologize. But it goes beyond apologies and acknowledgement. Now, the legal issue of it is more about the money. It's all about the money, fellows. That's all this is about. It's about the money. The money is the key issue. See, when you acknowledge something, accepting the responsibility of something, when that thing is put into the legal framework, then you have to be held responsible for that. And that is where European countries and America don't want to take that responsibility. Like I said earlier, if they are willing to pay reparations, they will all these countries that were involved in this slave trade will vote yes. But as far as they are not prepared to pay reparations, they are not going to put themselves in the position for them to be on the hook for that. So they will never, never support any resolution, regardless of where you put it. They will never support it, either Europe or the United States of America. They will never. And let me tell you something, fellas. If you lump the Muslim Arab slave trade to it, all these Middle Eastern countries, Turkey, Persia, and all these countries that also, the Mediterranean countries that also were part of that, going back to the 7th century, all of these people also vote no. Because they're also going to seek advice from the legal authorities, the lawyers, and they will tell them, no, you can't vote yes on this because you'll also be held accountable and you'll be responsible for that. So all of them will vote no. That's why I want this new resolution to be lumped together, that we can see where all these countries stand on this issue. If they really believe in what they are saying, let's put them together and reintroduce this resolution. I mean, we can introduce separately because at the end of the day, evil is evil. Like I said before, slavery is bad, whether it started in the 7th century in the eastern part of Africa, northeastern part of Africa, North Africa, all the way to some part of West Africa, Mauritania, Sahel, or whatever you want to call it. At the end of the day, it was all evil. It was all evil and simple as that. No ifs and buts about it. And it has to be acknowledged. So we have to put them together or introduce another resolution to lump all these two together for the world to see how much Africa has been devastated by slave trade going back the 7th century Muslim Arab slave trade all the way to the transatlantic slave trade. But now that with the issue of reparations where, like I said before, these countries are very hesitant when it comes to paying reparations and stuff and so on and so forth, but they will argue that the people who committed these heinous crimes, their ancestors, the modern European or American, shouldn't be held responsible for something that was done, but they all benefited from it. You live in Europe, all these European countries that you live in with their economies, just as well as America, regardless of what anybody says, it was the slavery. Slavery played a key role in their development. Played a very key role, especially in the United States of America and all of Europe and all the European countries that participated in it. They played a key role in their economic development. So if you are benefiting from it today, you cannot say, that because it happened 400 years ago, 500 years, 1,000 years ago, we cannot be held accountable. I'm sorry, fellas. You have to pay up. You have to pay up. After all, the French took reparations from Haiti. When the Haitians defeated them in that Napoleon War, war against the Haitians, when the Haitians defeated them, they argued that for the Haitians kicking them out of Haiti and denying them their slaves, that's the saddest truth about this nonsense that the French made. That the Haitians kicking them out and defeating them, that in turn denied them the French, the slaves that they own in Haiti, and the plantations that they own. So therefore, Haitians had to pay them reparations. And the Haitians, they paid them reparations. It took the Haitians over 100 or something years, 150 years or so, to pay them reparations. So if the Haitians pay the French reparations, I don't want to hear it from the French. They should be able to pay all the African colonies who are also requesting reparations. It shouldn't be an issue at all because they already took reparations. They already set a precedent of taking reparations from the enslaved Haitians. So they should be able to cough up and pay reparations to their, former colonies and their so on and so forth. And the same with America, same with Europe. By the end of the day, like I said, when it comes to that issue, I don't think these countries will ever pay reparations to either African Americans in America or Africans on the African continent, because they're going to also make the argument that the Africans that contributed to the slaves that were also sold and brought to the Americas also have to be held accountable. And that's where it becomes very, very fishy. Because now you're going to go to where? Which African kingdoms? You know, because back then we didn't have what we call today Nigeria, Togo, Cameroon, Ghana, you know, Tanzania, and, you know, Ethiopia, and so on and so forth. They were all tribal. So, I mean, so this is a little bit fishy. But if anyway, even in my own humble opinion, should it come to the issue of paying reparations, I wouldn't want even any of these European countries or Arab countries or America paying to any African government today. It should be like a trust fund. To me, that would be the best form of setting the reparations in order. Having a trust fund where that money goes into a trust fund. It doesn't go to the countries of Africa today because these countries in the Africa and Caribbean, the politicians are so corrupt. That money is not going to go do what it's supposed to go. So rather, if they set up a trust fund where this money will be allocated to these countries in terms of development, infrastructural development, and economic development, whether to build schools, hospitals, roads, water, electricity, whatever, that trust fund will go and do exactly that for these countries without a dime going through the government. I mean, this has been done before. I mean, America, had a program during George Bush time for the countries, transitioning to democracy in Africa and so on and so on. And what the US government did was if you win that award, you tell the United States government the project that needs to be done in your country, and the US government will finance that project 100% without a dime going through your government. They did it. They did it in Ghana, they did it in Gabon and other places. And it worked perfectly. So that same model can be used. Because if you don't want any reparations going to the corrupt governments, I think that's the best model for reparations to go to these African countries. Setting up a trust fund where the money goes into that trust and be used for social and economic development, mainly infrastructures like schools, hospitals, roads, and so on. So, fellas, it's about time, and finally, led by Ghana, it happened with this UN General Assembly resolution. But this resolution is not complete until there's another resolution incorporating it with this one, going back to the 7th century Muslim Arab slave trade that preceded the transatlantic slavery. That slave trade, according to historians, caused even more damage to Africa. All right, fellows, if it's Sunday, it's the Africa Weekly Talk. God bless you guys. Have a great week and peace and love. Thank you guys for listening.